Burnout has turned into one of the defining problems of modern life, often described as a mix of deep exhaustion, emotional distance, and a sense of meaning slipping away from daily effort. Many older generations describe long and difficult working lives, yet the current era seems to produce a different kind of fatigue that does not fade with a single weekend off. To understand why burnout now appears more common and more intense, it is necessary to look at how culture, technology, economics, and expectations around work have changed over the last few decades. Each of these shifts did not create burnout alone, but together they formed an environment where chronic exhaustion is easier to enter and harder to escape. Number 8 begins with the spread of the concept itself. In the 1970s, the word burnout started to appear in psychological research to describe emotional exhaustion in helping professions such as doctors, nurses, and social workers. From the 1990s onward, and especially in the early 2000s, this term moved from academic writing into news articles, self-help books, workplace training, and online media. The significance of this change is that a vague sense of being overwhelmed turned into a recognized condition with a name, a pattern, and a story. Once a label spreads, more people can see their own experience inside it. The immediate consequence was a rise in self-reporting, workplace surveys, and public discussion about stress and mental strain. Over the long term, this language shift changed how individuals interpret tiredness and disconnection. Instead of blaming only personal weakness, many began to connect their state to work conditions, social pressure, and systems that demand constant performance. Number 7 focuses on the erosion of boundaries between work and home life after the spread of mobile devices, home internet, and remote tools since the late 1990s. Before this period, many workers in offices, factories, and shops had a clearer divide. At the end of the shift, the physical workplace stayed behind. With the rise of laptops, smartphones, and corporate messaging software in the early 21st century, tasks, messages, and expectations started to follow workers into living rooms, bedrooms, and vacations. Remote work, which means doing a job outside a central office through digital communication, expanded this effect further. The significance of this shift lies in the way it removes a clear off signal for the brain. The immediate result is a constant low-level readiness to respond, checking email late at night, looking at messages during meals, or thinking about unfinished tasks while trying to rest. Over time, this constant partial attention prevents true recovery, increases sleep problems, and creates the feeling that work is never fully done, which is a strong driver of burnout. Number 6 examines the rise of measurement culture in work and daily life from the 1990s onward. Many modern workplaces use detailed metrics such as key performance indicators, often called KPIs, which are numbers that track how well a person or team is meeting goals. At the same time, social media platforms began to display likes, views, followers, and watch time for almost every action. This created a world where behavior is constantly counted and compared. The significance of this is that personal worth starts to blend with visible numbers, and any number can always be higher. The short-term effect is pressure to maximize output, answering more tickets, sending more messages, creating more content, or improving visible scores. Over the long term, this constant self-measurement encourages people to see rest only as a tool to restore productivity, not as a basic human need. The feeling of never being enough, even when working hard, steadily feeds chronic stress and emotional exhaustion. Number 5 looks at growing economic insecurity and rising living costs, especially from the 2000s to the present. In many developed countries, wages for young and mid-career workers have not grown at the same pace as housing, education, and basic expenses. At the same time, stable long-term positions have often been replaced with contract roles, freelance work, or gig jobs, which are short-term tasks paid per piece rather than as a steady salary. The significance here is that many people feel only a thin margin between stability and crisis. The immediate result is a strong pressure to accept overtime, take on extra responsibilities, or juggle side jobs even when already exhausted, because saying no feels risky. Over time, this sense of living one bad month away from serious financial trouble creates a constant background fear. That fear makes it far harder to slow down, change jobs, or take breaks, trapping people in patterns that lead directly into burnout. Number 4 examines the shift from mainly physical labor to mainly mental labor over the last 50 years. Earlier in the 20th century, a large share of jobs involved physical effort in factories, fields, and manual trades. By the late 20th and early 21st century, a growing number of workers moved into roles based on information: writing, planning, coding, customer service, management, and creative tasks. These jobs don't always exhaust the body, but they demand constant decision-making, focus, emotional control, and social performance. The significance of this transformation is that mental fatigue is less visible and often less socially respected than physical tiredness. The immediate consequence is that many knowledge workers feel confused and guilty about their exhaustion, since their bodies don't show the classic signs of heavy labor. Over the long term, unclear limits, constant mental switching between tasks, and emotional strain from dealing with clients or conflicts build up into a deep kind of weariness, without the clear signals that would normally tell someone to stop. Number 3 turns to the decline of strong offline community structures that once acted as support systems. In much of the 20th century, many people were regularly involved in local religious groups, unions, clubs, extended family gatherings, or neighborhood networks. These groups offered identity and connection that did not depend on job performance. From the late 20th century onward, higher mobility, urbanization, and changing social patterns led to more people living far from extended family, moving often for work or study, and spending more time alone or in small households. Online communities and group chats grew in their place. The significance of this change is that fewer people have physical spaces where they can exist without pressure to perform or present a perfect image. In the short term, when work becomes overwhelming, there are fewer offline places to bring that burden and be supported. Over time, weaker social ties and greater isolation remove an important buffer against stress, which makes individuals more vulnerable to burnout when work or life pressure rises. Number 2 focuses on intensified social comparison driven by global connectivity and social media since the mid-2000s. In earlier decades, most comparison took place within a small circle of neighbors, coworkers, classmates, or relatives. With the rise of platforms that show highlights of millions of lives, individuals now see constant images of success, travel, income, fitness, and achievement from around the world. The significance of this is that the reference point for a normal life quietly shifts upward. The immediate effect is a growing sense of being behind, even when living a stable and decent life. Every rest period can begin to feel like lost ground compared to others who seem to be advancing faster. Over the long term, this constant upward comparison drives people to push harder, take on more tasks, and judge themselves harshly even when they are already at their limit. This persistent mental pressure turns everyday work into a race with no clear finish line, which is a direct path to burnout. Number 1 addresses the modern expectation that work should also provide deep meaning and identity, a trend that strengthened from the late 20th and became very strong in the early 21st. Career advice began to focus heavily on finding a passion, doing what one loves, and turning interests into income. Work was no longer presented simply as a way to earn money, but as the central source of personal purpose and self-definition. The significance of this idea is that it raised hopes without changing the underlying economic and corporate systems, which still often focus on cost control, efficiency, and replacement when needed. The short-term result is that many workers pour emotional energy, loyalty, and even their sense of self into their jobs, while facing long hours, unstable contracts, or sudden restructuring. Over the long term, the gap between the promise of meaningful, fulfilling work and the reality of stressful, insecure conditions produces not only tiredness, but also a sense of betrayal and loss of trust.
When work fails as both a source of security and a source of meaning, burnout becomes not just physical or mental, but also deeply emotional. Taken together, these 8 forces form a connected picture. A recognized label gave people language for their condition, while technology erased boundaries and turned people into constant performers under the eye of metrics and comparison. Economic pressures made it dangerous to slow down, even as work shifted into forms of effort. At the same time, offline communities weakened just as social media raised expectations and ideals to unreachable levels. And a new story about work as life's main source of purpose collided with systems that often treat workers as expendable. Burnout feels more common today, not simply because individuals became weaker, but because the surrounding world changed in ways that keep minds and bodies on high alert with fewer safe places to rest. Understanding these roots does not remove the problem, but it does make clear that modern burnout is not a private failure.